Yes, you can do this, and this, and this, and this, if you harness the power of the Starborn in your journey through the Starfield. I spent hours testing all 24 powers in various scenarios to give you a complete breakdown of the finer mechanics of how they all work and how useful I actually think they are. We'll be comparing them at their starting rank all the way up to rank 10 where they max out as well, because some powers are absolutely awful at rank 1, but are insane once they rank up. Let's get started with a quick breakdown of the power system itself and how acquisition works, and then we'll dive deep into each individual power's mechanics. Starborn powers are rewards tied to the main campaign in Starfield, and you collect one from each artifact temple in the game, totaling up to 24. These temples are named Alpha through to Omega, the letters of the Greek alphabet. While in every playthrough your order of obtaining these is randomized to a degree, the specific power you receive from each temple is always the same. For example, Temple Alpha always rewards the personal atmosphere power, while Temple Omega always rewards the particle beam power. The final battle mission of the campaign also rewards you with a power, which most people will likely not notice as you get a giant chunk of XP at the same time, that almost always levels you up, which makes this easy to gloss over. You can only obtain a power once in each playthrough, so if you want to always have them at their highest rank, then make sure to collect all 24 before you pass over into each New Game Plus iteration. There are unfortunately quite a few cases of there being bugs for collecting powers as well, and I've encountered it myself too. My best recommendation is for you to make sure you complete every single quest with Vlad for artifact hunting until he no longer gives you new temples to find before you do any additional campaign mission. I'm extremely confident that this is the primary reason for how save files have been getting bugged. Your Starborn powers cost a certain amount of energy to cast, and your character has a maximum of 60 Starborn energy. I haven't found a way to increase this cap naturally yet, but I would expect a skill magazine hiding in the game would be the only possible way aside from maybe some gear mod. Your Starborn energy recovers at a rate of around 1 per second and can be further increased by consuming a quantum essence, which increases the recharge rate by about 8 times. You receive 1 quantum essence for every Starborn enemy you kill in the game, and they last for 60 seconds after you consume them. As you increase your powers from rank 1 up to the cap of rank 10, you'll receive a variety of different benefits from each respective power, either in the form of increased damage, duration of effect, range of effect, lower cast cost, and more. One of the best examples of ranking up having a noticeable effect is on Gravity Dash. At rank 1, it is horrendous. It is pretty much useless, it barely moves your character, but at rank 10, it is a hypermobility skill that will let you just zip through the map, and honestly, I could see some people pushing to New Game Plus 9 just to have this power. So we just watched ranks 1 to 6, and now we're watching 7 to 10, and you can see how much more distance we're getting with this. Super useful if you're doing some planetary exploration where you've got a lot of distance to cover between key objectives. So no matter the rank, it's always going to cost 15 power to cast Grav Dash. However, another bonus that it provides is after Grav Dashing, you get a damage buff as well. At rank 1, you only get 10% damage for 6 seconds, but at rank 10, you get 100% damage for 15 seconds, meaning you could have 100% uptime of that 100% damage buff if you consistently Grav Dash. The combination of increased dash distance plus the damage bonus for progressive ranks makes this easily the most polarizing Starborn power there is. I would personally rank Grav Dash absolute like F tier, bottom of the barrel at rank 1, and then it goes up to S++ if you manage to rank it up to rank 10. For time's sake, the rest of the powers that I'm going to be showcasing are only going to show footage of rank 1 and 10, but just know that with any of those intermediate ranks between 2 to 9, there's going to be at least one positive benefit tied to the rank up. For example, rank 2 could increase the effectiveness of the power, while rank 3 could decrease the total cost of the power. Personal Atmosphere is a personal favorite of mine, and I probably used it more than any other Starborn power in my first playthroughs, just given how much utility it provides. When you cast it, you regain all of your O2 meter, including if your CO2 meter had got fully redlined, so you can use all of your stamina bar up, then cast it, you'll get all of that back, and then for about 15 seconds on rank 1, you'll have unlimited run energy, and then your bar will start to decrease again. What's even better is that if you're over encumbered, you still get that unlimited O2, which is great if you have some items you're lugging around that you don't want to part with, or you need to shuffle materials between different storage options. This is great if you're doing research or crafting, where you can just grab all of your craftable resources in one go and just have thousands of kilos of stuff, and then you just pop Personal Atmosphere and you're good to go. Because the power cost for this decreases as you rank it up, you actually have more than 100% uptime potential for it, so you could actually switch to other powers in between activating it if you really wanted to in a pinch. I think that no matter what rank you have of Personal Atmosphere, it's for sure an S tier power, and I would say that it definitely goes up to S plus once you hit rank 10. This one has got to be the biggest lunch bag letdown in all of Starfield for me so far, and that is Gravity Wave. Whether you're rank 10 or 1, nothing changes with the ability. The cost doesn't change, the ability stays exactly the same. I've tried to test it on a bunch of different objects and people. It's always the same thing. You get this short range little dinky blast that knocks people over for a few seconds, but it is a far cry from the power of the Dragonborn's Fus Ro Dah. At best, I've got to give it a D tier. Obviously, it doesn't matter whether you're rank 1 or 10 for this one, but compared to some of the other powers, it's so irrelevant that I would just never consider running this. Next up is Particle Beam, which is frankly quite unremarkable. It's got a very low base damage of around 51, depending on the armor of the target that you're attacking, and then that scales up progressively as you go towards rank 10. With all skills maxed and rank 10, I was able to hit 200 damage per cast, but even then, it's still not very good compared to some of the other skills. The power cost is always 15, and the projectile itself is quite slow, but it does have a pretty decent range on it. Overall, I'd say it's pretty underwhelming, and it's maybe only good earlier on in the game where that 50 damage is more meaningful, but if you're facing any enemies with any significant health, that's just peanut damage in the grand scheme of things. So early game, I'd give it a C tier, overall a D tier regardless of rank. So Eternal Harvest is a cool one. Anytime you cast this power, you'll respawn all of the flora around you within a predetermined radius based on the rank. At rank 1, that seems to be 25 meters, and then at rank 10, honestly, I'm not sure. I've tried to test this from what seems to be like over 100 meters away, and it still respawns everything. So you can just keep on casting that, and you will always have resources at the ready. Power cost decreases from 25 at rank 1, all the way down to 10 at rank 10. And I'd say it's a pretty decent power overall, although it has a fairly niche use case. Typically, you don't have to be on the surface gathering resources manually by hand, but if that's something that you enjoy doing, this is definitely a very good skill for doing exactly that. And so I'd probably give this a B tier at rank 1 and only boost it up to B plus at rank 10, given that the extra range doesn't really do all too much since you'd probably be right beside the thing that you want to reharvest. However, the decrease in power cost is nice. Anti-gravity field should look very familiar to any of you who paid attention during the Starfield Direct. When you cast this power, you will create a zero gravity zone that will lift any enemies and objects up into the air for about 10 seconds, regardless of rank. It seems to fully ragdoll just about anything that gets caught in its wake, which is pretty funny, but it does not kill them or damage them in any way. After those 10 seconds, the enemy will drop, and then they'll spend a few seconds regaining their balance. Energy cost goes down from 45 to 22 from ranks 1 to 10, and overall I think it's a really good power. The duration and area of effect is quite large, along with the fact that they have to get up after that makes it very useful. Also, it's just super fun to use when you have a bunch of objects that you want to float into the air. I'd say this is an A- at rank 1 just because it has a higher power cost, and then it bumps up to an A as you approach rank 10. Phase Time is a super useful Starborn power that decreases in power cost as you approach rank 10, while also increasing the duration of the effect as you increase ranks as well. You'll slow time, allowing you to dish out serious damage while only taking minimal damage from slowed enemies. It's interesting because visually it'll look like when you're attacking and firing weapons that the projectiles are moving slower than normal, but the damage gets registered immediately just as it normally would. Because this ability slows down time globally compared to some of the other abilities that affect only a specific area, it has some additional utility that makes it more practical in certain cases. With all those factors considered, I'd start this at an A+, and then move it up to an S- once you hit rank 10, as the decreased power cost does help significantly. Create Vacuum is an incredibly strong power against any enemy that consumes oxygen. As far as I know, almost every creature falls under that category, and of course any humanoid creature does. The exception here obviously being robots that require no oxygen, so this ability is absolutely useless against them. But I want to say robot enemies make up a very small fraction of the total enemies that you encounter, so this is very useful in most cases. Power cost does not change between ranks 1 to 10, but the amount of damage dealt per second goes up pretty dramatically. Clearly the damage dealt is a percent of the opponent's max HP, as we can see over 1,000 damage being dealt every tick on a level 94 Terramorph, and only a few damage being ticked down on lower level enemies. The duration of the ability also does not change with level, that always remains the same, and you cannot stack more than one instance of this power on an enemy. Because this is an area of effect ability, the power cost is not too high, and it does percent max HP damage, this is a very good skill against the right type of enemy. On paper, this skill is S+ tier, But to be fair, against weaker enemies with very low HP pools, this is pretty useless, it's D tier. However, against stronger enemies like Terramorph, this is definitely S+ tier given how much damage it can do per second. Creator's Piece is a neat one where any enemy caught in the cast range will de-aggro you for 10 seconds, and if they're an enemy that has a gun, they will drop the gun and you can actually pick it up in some cases. Interestingly, the power cost does not decrease with additional ranks, and I haven't noticed any differences between ranks 1 to 10 in terms of how long people stay de-aggroed off you for. If anyone is able to figure out what the exact differences are between ranks 1 to 10, let me know. Overall, it's a pretty decent power, but it doesn't do any damage, the area of effect is smaller, and the duration is shorter. So I'd say it's more like a B tier skill at best, but it's still very useful. Next up is Precognition, which is a super niche utility power. Whenever you have this power active, you'll be able to see what the potential dialogue outcome is for any interaction you have with an NPC. You may not always get the entire answer, but you'll get the general gist of what the response will be. Power cost goes down with subsequent ranks, but in general, that's not very relevant. Overall, this is more of a nice-to-have skill for any of you who really enjoy looking at dialogue options but don't necessarily want to click through all of them. It's also worth mentioning that this power does not work for persuasion attempts. Honestly, this is a D- skill because it would just be a pain in the ass to swap between it for what is arguably a pretty useless effect. Gravity Well is a generally good power. It's similar to Create Vacuum in the sense that it creates an area of effect, only it pulls everything towards the center of the AoE. It's also different in the sense that it damages any enemy pulled into the center. As you progress through the ranks, you lower the energy cost from 45 down to 22, however the duration does not change. Given the fact that it immobilizes enemies in a large area of effect, does percent HP damage, and it has decreasing power costs as ranks progress, this is definitely an S trending to S+ power at rank 10. A final note is the fact that this is a slow-moving projectile, so you may also want to aim this at the feet of your enemies to make sure that the ability lands. When I first saw Reactive Shield, it seemed like it was great on paper, but when you actually put it to the test, it's really not that great. It has the potential to weaken incoming fire, but it doesn't fully nullify it, and the reflective damage is really not that great. It can, however, reflect on-hit effects back, which can be pretty nice, but overall, it's not nearly as good as some of the other powers you can have in your arsenal. Energy cost does scale down as you increase in ranks, but you can see from this footage that you still end up taking damage, and it only blocks projectiles, so melee attacks are all still fair game here. All in all, I'd say it's a C scaling to C+ power. Earthbound is a neat one. All it does is simply change the gravity of the planet you're currently on to simulate that of Earth's so that you have just one standard gravity. So this could be useful in low G planets where you may not want to be floating in the air as much when you jump, or making those higher gravity planets a little more bearable on the knees. You can also use this in zero G environments, which can be cool for bringing things down to Earth, but I really don't see this being especially useful or favorable compared to many of the other powers we've already reviewed. Ranks 1 to 10 all have the same power cost, but the duration gets greatly extended as you approach rank 10. It's not a completely useless power, but it's pretty irrelevant in most cases, so I'm gonna have to give this a D-. Inner Demon is not bad. From ranks 1 to 10, the power cost does not change, however the duration of the ability does. You'll summon an exact replica of the NPC you cast this on, however you cannot replicate your own companions. When using Inner Demon on low-level enemies, the spawn is quite useless and the AI is pretty dumb at all ranks. However, you can use this on just about any enemy, so if you're squaring up against a Terramorph, you can definitely cast this on it to lend a hand. However, at rank 1, the duration is only about 10 seconds, so it's pretty much useless. Even at higher ranks where it can last up to 90 seconds, it's still not that great, though it can help for drawing enemy fire for a brief moment. This is definitely F tier doo-doo at rank 1, and it probably goes up to about C+ at rank 10 because you've got way better options at your disposal. Sense Star Stuff is a pretty neat skill, but its practical uses are fairly limited. It's pretty much temporary wall hacks for any NPC caught in the cast radius, and that radius increases as your rank increases as well. While there are obviously minor benefits to utilizing this in combat, there are certainly way better offensive options to choose from. I could see some tiny use case for this if you're hunting around for a certain NPC in an area and maybe it helps make them more visible, but even that's wishful thinking. We're throwing this one into D- at all ranks. Oh man, Solar Flare, one of the best Starborn powers in the game for sure. It's useful against just about any target, even more so against higher HP enemies because it's got percent HP damage. But what makes this particularly special is that you can keep casting the ability on an enemy and stack up the damage over time effect. While the damage itself doesn't change with progressive ranks, the fact that it goes down all the way to 10 energy cost makes it incredibly viable for late game stomping of high HP enemies. Even a single cast can shred through a level 94 Terramorph. The only case where I've really seen this ability underperform is against legendary enemies, since the damage scales off of the white bar and not the total HP pool of the enemy, meaning it'll take 4 times longer to kill it than it normally would. Regardless, this power is extremely lethal and is especially useful against stronger enemies, and against weaker enemies where this wouldn't be as relevant, you can probably just one-tap them with any weapon anyways. So although I'd say this is a D tier skill against low HP enemies, this is 100% an S+ tier skill against higher HP enemies. In scenarios like the one you see on screen with all these little bugs, there's an argument for not using a skill like this and rather going for a large AoE ability that will fully incapacitate them rather than deal damage, and I think that's totally fair. I'd say this skill is certainly more geared towards fighting a single Terramorph or some sort of high HP single enemy. Life Force is a solid Starborn power that has offensive and utility aspects to it. While the power cost remains the same from ranks 1 to 10, the potential damage and healing it does increases threefold. The effect lasts for 16 seconds and seems to heal you for an equivalent amount to the damage dealt. While you can't stack the effect on a single target, you can cast it on your allies and use them to heal yourself as well. This is particularly useful for anybody doing some sort of restricted playthrough, or for those of you playing on higher difficulties where healing supplies may be in shorter supply given the extra damage you're taking while playing. While the damage this deals is pretty negligible, I find it pretty easy to swap to this power, throw a cast onto my ally, and then go back to my normal powers while I top off my HP. Overall, I'd say it's a solid B to B+. Elemental Pull is very similar to Eternal Harvest, however, instead of refreshing all flora, it gathers all resources within the cast radius. As you rank this up, the cast cost decreases while the radius increases. You can grab a ton of resources with a single cast with this, and it's especially useful for grabbing exotic materials that take much longer for the cutter to go through. Despite being a somewhat useful power, we already know that it's way better for you to purchase resources from vendors or to get an outpost set up to grab them for yourself. Because it does have some utility, I'll still give it a C and a C+. Sunless Space is definitely solid, giving you the ability to freeze enemies in their tracks for quite an extended period of time as you hit rank 10. Each subsequent rank decreases the cast cost while increasing the freeze time. The projectile itself has a general area of effect, so you can freeze more than one enemy at a time with this as well. This ability boasts what seems to be the longest duration CC in the game, on top of the fact that there's a recovery period after the freeze breaks as well. This gives you enough time to decimate just about any enemy if you combine it with other powers or strong weapons. Because it doesn't inherently do any damage on its own, I'm going to start it at A, but I'd say it scales up to an S-, given that you can combine it with so many other things to just wreak havoc. Moonform is probably one of the most interesting Starborn powers. There's a bit of risk-reward tied to it, and it also kind of gets worse the higher you rank it up in some cases. While in Moonform, your character takes on a stone-like appearance, you continually regenerate HP, but you can't move at all. During this time, your character is completely invincible, except for when you take damage over time effects, which continue to tick down no matter what. If you're unable to kill everything before your Moonform ends, if you have a bunch of enemies pile up on you, you could get pummeled as soon as it ends, so definitely watch out for that. As you rank it up, the duration of Moonform increases, but the power cost remains the same. The sole fact that it increases the duration that it lasts is exactly why it's kind of a shitty skill. Most of the time, you're not going to take much longer than, 10 or 15 seconds to kill an enemy, but you are fully stuck in this form for about 30 seconds, and there is no way to break it. Overall, I think it's a decent skill, and it certainly has usability, especially in places where there's limited cover and you're taking fire from multiple directions. I'd say it's an A- skill that probably scales up to about an A at rank 5, and then goes down to a B+ if you hit rank 10, funny enough. Alright, we're getting closer to the end here. Alien Reanimation is pretty much identical to Inner Demon, except for the fact that you must cast it on an already dead enemy, and it can only be an alien creature. No humanoids allowed. Those two restrictions make this even worse than Inner Demon already was, so I'm going to drop this 2 points below that. Parallel Self, another Starborn power that seems cool, but in practice is pretty useless. It costs 45 power to summon a clone of yourself, and it will spawn with the weapon that you currently have equipped when you cast. The clone only seems to have about 200 HP, so as soon as you start fighting anything over like level 15 or 20, it becomes irrelevant and just gets a one-shot every single time. The AI is pretty dumb, and it doesn't put up very much of a fight in most cases. It does very poorly against stronger melee aliens, but against some lower level humanoids, it can kind of put up a fight. All in all, it's still a pretty horrible use of your Starborn power. Supernova is a super cool power that emanates power outwards from your character, dealing around 114 damage at rank 1, scaling up to 350 damage at rank 10 with all other skills maxed out. Power cost does not change based on rank, and neither does the radius. It seems like damage is the only thing that actually gets affected by leveling up. The area effect isn't huge, but it's pretty good for clearing out trash mobs since it does a fixed amount of damage. I'd give it a higher rating, but the fact that it has a 45 power fixed cost makes it really tough to actually run this consistently, since you'll only get one cast off unless you're running a quantum essence at the same time. There are just way better options that scale down in power cost and have similar, if not greater, damaging effects against stronger enemies, or some added utility and CC built into them as well. We're going to put this solidly in the B to B+ range. And last on our list is Void Form. Nothing changes with this ability based on the rank, the only thing that changes is the power cost to cast it. You're looking at 45 at rank 1 and 18 for rank 10. When you cast Void Form, you'll be stealth for 20 seconds, however any action aside from movement actions will immediately cancel Void Form's effect. This means picking up an item, opening a door, all of those will null the effects of Void Form. This is particularly useful, however, as that single action that you perform will count as being hidden when you perform it. So you can steal things straight off of tables, or perform a sneak attack on somebody who would otherwise be able to see you. You can also do this while in combat, and sometimes it will proc a sneak attack, but it's not 100% reliable. Still pretty useful if you're running a stealth exclusive build. This can really help pump up your damage and get you more stealth hits off. It's also a solid option for anyone looking to take a generally more stealthy approach to exploring dungeons and points of interest, where normally people would be able to see you. You'll just have to be cognizant that when you open a door, it will still reveal you. This is definitely a sleeper pick that I think a lot of people will underestimate, and I think it fairly earns a spot in the A tier, if not even going up to S- at rank 10, given how many use cases there are for a power like this. Alright, we have covered all 24 Starborn powers at this point. I hope this gave you some context as to what powers are useful versus not, and whether or not it's worth it to you to push to rank 10 for any of these powers. If you enjoy deep dives like this and want to see more, consider subscribing, and let me know what kind of topics you'd like to see me cover next. That's all for today, I'll see you in the Starfield. Peace.